Fantasy Baseball on deck, everybody. This is Austin, and the news headline today is a big one. And most of all, you're going to hear about Sean Murphy, specifically a Wright State Raider up, going from the Oakland Athletics over to the 2021 champions, Atlanta Braves. But the actual most meaningful pick here is going to be William Contreras moving from the Atlanta Braves over to be the full-time catcher behind the plate at the Brewers, and why is it super valuable. And even before we start to get into his stats and Brewers as an offense, I don't necessarily believe in catchers, even though I drafted Will Smith in all three of my leagues. I had him kind of like as a trade piece to start, but given how productive he was, I ended up keeping him throughout the year. Whatever. My advice to you is that to not have a catcher on roster at all. If you go to your league settings, click settings, and go down to your position starters, you're going to want to look at anywhere in here maximums wise. And most likely here down to towards the pitching aspects, you're going to see maybe some numbers that basically restrict how many pitchers you can load up on to make sure you have a full roster. If you have to roster a catcher, you kind of got to do that math. But most likely you will be in this situation where you don't have to have one at all. But if you have one, this is kind of a situation where they give me a max amount of starting and relief pitchers that I can't have on my roster. And then this is the minimum that I need on roster. And these are the maximum that I have to stay within on my roster, meaning that basically after you do the math, not important, I have to roster a catcher in this league. So we'll kind of go through the strategy of both situations, whether or not you do have to or don't have to have one. If you do have to have a catcher, then this is super meaningful regardless, but you kind of have to, you play your draft differently. So if I go into specifically kind of looking at catcher rankings, I took Will Smith last year again. All three of my leagues, one was a keeper, so I didn't really take him. I just kept them. But the 61st overall pick, I used a really, really high draft pick on him to just make sure that I have the best catcher in baseball. He ended up being outpaced by JTR Romalto by 1 point, essentially for over the year. But what does that mean for the for like kind of drafting as we go into this next season, preparing for 2023. I used a super valuable pick and essentially got a player, given that the position is so limited. He even got 500 at bats, but he should have had he sat out all the time. You can see this is kind of as you can see, this is kind of the volume that Will Smith was required to play kind of on a 2-week basis. And this is a lot more than most catchers. If I look at his production compared to his peers right in this spot of the final standings for the year, all these players around Will Smith were people that didn't get drafted. Bobby Witt Jr. got drafted and JT Realmuto got drafted, but these position players right around him that had a lot more at bats and a lot more opportunities even, for the most part, scored similarly. So, is the 61st overall pick somewhere around that range worth it for Will Smith again? I assume he's going to be probably pretty similar coming into the season, given that he's going to be, again, the cleanup hitter for the Los Angeles Dodgers, who finished number 1 in scoring this past year. So, we'll specifically focus on William Contreras. If we look over here, the Milwaukee Brewers last season were 3rd over in the entire league in home runs, and that basically equated to a top 10 offense overall. He's moving into a top 10 offense overall. That's only now getting better with William Contreras. I don't like that offense. None of the players on this roster in this lineup were top 10 players at their positions, but they just, it's just one of those things with the metrics say the more home runs you hit, the more runs that you score just in general. So they're okay with having a bunch of low average swing for the fences guys and not necessarily not as much value towards getting on bases and playing any sort of small ball. So William Contreras moving into the 4 spot, the 3 spot, whatever he ends up being. If he produces anywhere close to what he did last year, this is going to be super significant, really, really important. So if we go down here, I added him to the very end of the list. He only had 277 at-bats last year. He was an all-star, but that's with fan voting for the entire season. 16 home runs across 277 at-bats. That equates to a 30-plus home run sort of guy if we were to double his at-bats. And that's not necessarily going to happen given that he's a catcher, but we can assume and we can hope that he's going to get to that 500 number, just because he is so offensively productive. And what does that mean? If we go to total bases, we can see, like when we talked about, this is the way of measuring volume for an entire season. Who are the most productive players individually without the help around them? So we can see that Aaron Judge, Austin Riley, Paul Goldschmidt, Freddie Freeman, Jose Ramirez, and down the line were the most individually productive players. But how effective and how productive are these players per at bat? Let's say per hit. So this is how I really figure out who's valuable and who's not, how you can really determine what players are coming off from injury. So we can see, like how valuable was Mike Trout actually last year, even though he missed some time. He ended up being a top 10 offensive player for his position, even though he had like around almost 200 less at bats than some of his peers scored similarly. So if we go to total bases per hit, this means essentially how many bases did a player earn per hit. William Contreras, number 2 overall in this top essentially 100 people that I've pulled from the list, meaning that when he got hits last year as a 24-year-old kid, he was averaging 2.28 bases per hit. So he was averaging over a double. He only had 277 at bats. And for a guy also that's hitting 267 average, he's just bound to explode. He's 25 years old. He averaged more bases per hit than Mike Trout and Aaron Judge last season. So if we look at the total bases per hit production, William Contreras, number 2 in all of baseball, more than Mike Trout, more than Aaron Judge. And if we use this level of production per hit for an entire season, assuming that Wilson Contreras gets 500 at-bats this next season, we can look and compare against his peers at his own position. He would have scored 576 points. That's what he was on pace for last season, given his small 277 at-bat sample size. That'd be 50 points more scored than the top 2 players' position, given JT Realmuto and Will Smith. If we go over to batters overall, William Contreras would have scored similarly to those of Matt Olson, Bo Bichette, Christian Washer, Rafael Devers, which is absolutely a huge value. And what does that mean as we go into prepare for the 2023 fantasy baseball draft? He's currently ranked 281. Now that he's moving from Atlanta to the Milwaukee, where he's expected to get a lot more at-bats. Ideally, I think, again, if he produces anything similarly to the player that he was in Atlanta, he's going to play every single day. They're going to value offense over defense, and he has an opportunity to really improve his defense, given that he's only 25 years old. The true value in this is the William Contreras at 281. I think that William Contreras, if he gets 500 bats this season coming up, he's going to be a top 3 player with Will Smith and fill in the blank. So super high value, given that he is 281st ranked overall. And kind of the reason that this might be or may not be valuable to some of you guys here is Will Smith scored 414 points. If we go over to and if we look at our catcher rankings overall, there's only 2 catchers in the entire league that scored over 400 points in general, and he was towards the bottom of the list in productivity of the first page. So if we go over to pitchers and kind of drive home my point of don't take a pitcher unless you have to, there were 31 pitchers more productive than or at least scored 400 points plus this past year. So if you're at that point where, again, you don't have to take a catcher, I just wouldn't, because it's a lot more risky than finding an all-star caliber pitcher in that spot or, any other position. So again, I think that he's absolutely worth the draft spot, given that he's so late in the draft. He might be one of your very, very last picks. There's just too much production behind his name to not give him a chance. So that's the end of my show. It was really, really quick today, but I hope that it was insightful. Please comment on my video. Let me know how I'm doing. If you guys need any help or have any questions, comments, I'm always here for you. So anywho, happy rest of your day and talk soon. Bye.